Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well. Welcome back to today's bonus upload. Before we get into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. The merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They all were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost you a cent. Click that like button. It takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon. And please, folks, leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things, they really do help this channel to continue to grow and go, and they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into today's bonus, shall we? Tonight's first encounter. This bizarre encounter happened while on a Boy Scout trip. On this evening, a Boy Scout and some others were taking a short hike through the woods surrounding a cornfield, and they came to an area that had been harvested and cleared. Out in the moonlight, they saw something out there that was unlike anything they'd ever seen before or since, of which the witness states. We see a thing we assumed was a deer. The problem was it reeked like a rotting corpse, and we could hear very heavy, almost distressed breathing from this thing. What had us initially think it was a deer were the very obvious antlers on its head. We make some noise to scare whatever it is, screaming, growling, making the general ruckus to no effect. This thing stands up on two scrawny, hooved, we think legs, and looks right at us. Its eyes glinting in the moonlight like an animal in headlights. When it saw us, it was dead silent, no more breathing or anything. This thing looked to be at least 6 to 7 feet tall, hunched over, pale skin and patches of fur like an animal with mange. Lanky like a deer with an elongated face. It let out this terrifying howl. It was like a woman, a man, and a dying rabbit screaming all at the same time. I remember every single hair on my body standing on end. We were frozen in fright. It begins to move towards us in a creepy, shuddering motion, like it was a sickly robot. And we screamed and started running towards the woods and the campfire the adults had going. I remember glancing backward while running, myself in front of my best friend, and seeing it was very much near us. Its arms swung as if they were strings tied to a nail with very visible fingers on its hands. It seemed to have too many fingers, in fact. The huffing it made and the stench became all the stronger as we fled. We make it back to the fire and see that it's no longer following us. The adults ask us what was wrong, and we all looked so sheet white and scared. They heard the howl, thinking it was just us dicking around. We ended up moving our tents, made of plastic sheeting, by the adults' campsite and bonfire to be safe. The adults standing watch all night to make sure there were no rabid animals or crazy people in the woods that would harm us. It was by far the most scariest thing I had ever seen or gone through. We haven't heard of this thing since. Tonight's second encounter comes to us from Northeast Ohio by a witness who claims that he was at his cousin's house playing hide-and-seek outside one day when he was 14 years old. It's reported around dusk, and they were playing near a wooded creek when it was the witness's turn to search. And as he did, he claims that he heard the sound of leaves crackling underfoot. He turned to expect his cousin, but instead saw a deer through the brush that appeared to be oddly standing on its hind legs. Unusual for a deer, but which would prove to be even stranger than that, as the report reads. It was getting dark, and I was the one searching. I heard leaves crumbling, and when I turned to look, I saw what looked like a deer on its hind legs. I clearly remember seeing dog legs running, but the rest of the body was straight up, and it ran with incredible speed. And I knew it wasn't either of my cousins hiding. I ran as fast as I could back to the house, and one of my cousins was running in too. He saw the same thing. It still creeps me out to this day, because my uncle always told us how he saw weird things on that property. Tonight's third encounter. A sighting similar to that creature, that appears to have also had the ability to shapeshift, was made in the state of Delaware in 1993. The witness claims that he was around 8 years old at the time, and he had been staying with his family at his grandparents' house in a rural forested area near the town of Hawkinson. One morning, he says he woke to a clear day with the sun shining through his window, and also the surreal sight of a silhouette of a deer with a huge rack of antlers standing just outside. Things would get bizarre rapidly, and the witness says of what happened. It was right there, like almost pressed against the window in profile. I stared in awe, and that was when it changed. In one smooth movement, it reared up on its hind legs and was no longer a deer, but a man. There were only 2 men in the area, my grandfather and my dad, and it was clearly neither. Not sure if that made it better or worse. My grandfather was very built for his age, and Dad had a gut. This silhouette was clearly younger, muscular, but not like the brick shithouse my grandfather was. It exuded strength and scared the hell out of me. It stared to the side for a moment, and then it strode off with purpose, looking back. I want to tell myself it was just my imagination of a half-awake child, but I remember the awe and utter fear I felt when the deer changed. Tonight's fourth encounter comes to us from Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation in South Dakota. In 2010, the witness says that he was driving home from a late shift at work along Highway 63, when he came to a patch of thick fog. Peering through the murk ahead, he claims that he could see a group of women standing around what appeared to be a ditch. All of them were wearing oddly old-fashioned clothing. He was apparently so mesmerized by this sight that he turned his vehicle around and drove back. Only now, instead of women, there were some deer standing right where they had been. He parked the car and looked out onto the animals, finding it extremely odd that they should be there where those women had been standing just a few moments before. And he had the distinct feeling that they were staring back at him and studying him. This was unnerving enough that he was on his way, and it makes one wonder just what was going on here. Tonight's fifth encounter comes to us from Wichita Mountains of Oklahoma, 2012. In this account, a Kyle Haying claims that he was out on Wichita Mountain National Wildlife Refuge in order to take some photographs of the night sky with a friend. On this evening, at around 10 o'clock, the usual sounds of the forest suddenly became muted, and the local wildlife started to display some decidedly bizarre and uncharacteristic behavior. First, some elk came running by, and then a herd of bison, which all came uncomfortably close before hurrying off. And it seemed almost as if these animals were trying to get away from something scaring them out of the dark forest beyond. This was enough to spook the men into packing up their stuff and calling it a night. And as they did, they allegedly felt a strange change in air pressure, and all the sounds of the woods just stopped to send a profound silence crashing down on them. The 2 unsettled men then heard something rustling about out in some tall grass nearby, jarring in the otherwise void of silence that the blanketed area, and it seemed like whatever it was coming towards them. Kyle claims that he and his friend had then picked up some rifles they had with them, wary of what was approaching. They started the car and began to drive off when they saw something step out in front of the vehicle that they would never forget. A creature which the witness describes as having a head like an elk, but stood upright on 2 human legs, and which had 2 human arms and dark red eyes. As they passed it, the nightmarish creature lurched forward to hit the car, and Kyle floored it away as fast as he could, until they were about 3 miles away, where they stopped their flight to regain their wits. Kyle would say of what happened, "We were scared shitless. Things got even quieter when we stayed there. While there, we heard one ear-piercing screech or scream, almost a hunting screech of some sort that made my hair stand on end and gave me goosebumps even worse. With that, we left the mountains completely. We felt as though we were not wanted there that night. The way the wildlife acted, the figure that we came across, that the animals must have been running from, and then the scream of which I can only reference to happen to be a banshee. I can't forget the figure we saw, as well as that scream. It was not human, but it was not any wildlife that I am familiar with out there either." Tonight's 6th encounter comes to us from the state of Virginia. On this evening, a gentleman says that he was sitting on his back porch having a cigarette and talking to his friend on his mobile phone. The area is described as thickly wooded, and from somewhere out in the night he heard something run across the yard and crashing through the brush. He figured at this point that it was just a deer or some other animal and kept talking to his friend on the phone, but things would really get out of hand. Suddenly I hear this noise down by the dock. I was like, there it is again. For some reason, my first thought was there's some kids playing around down there. I don't know why I thought that, but that's the first thing I thought. Anyway, I got up and went running over towards the stairs to go down to the dock. And they're steep steps, and when I got to the stairs, I get to the top of them and I look down and there's this thing running up the stairs towards me, and I was just in shock. It was like a person, but it had a deer head. And it was running up the stairs so fast. It was crazy that it could even move that fast, and it was staring right at me. And I'm just standing there, and I'm staring at it. It had red eyes. It actually had red eyes. One friend said that it means it was demonic. I said I don't think it was demonic or anything. Anyway, it ran right up to me. It kept staring at me in my eyes, and I was staring right back. Just kind of in shock, I guess. When it got right up to me, it actually said something, which I don't know what it said, I just remember. I just know it said something like 4 or 5 syllables really fast. It seemed like it said words, but I don't know what they were. And then it ran right. It just kept running and ran right by me. I could have actually touched it. It was within inches of me. The stairway's only 4 feet across. I had hardly told anybody about this because it was just the craziest thing I had ever seen. That's what someone suggested, but I said, no, it was moving way too fast. It was moving so fast that when I thought about it later, I was like, man, it was almost like in a different dimension or something. That's all I could think. I think it was being that had a human body and a deer head. And the antlers weren't like a deer around here. They weren't like any white-tailed deer here. They were more spindly. They were spindly, and there was a lot more of them. A lot more like ties or branches than normal. I actually saw a branch once, and I was like, oh my god, that branch looks like one of those antlers on that thing I saw. Tonight's 7th and final encounter. Lynn is a woman of Navajo heritage who once lived in the town of Lovington, New Mexico. As a child in this instance, at the age of 8 years old, Lynn and her friends would play on the school grounds near her home. There was also a small grocery store with a large porch where the kids would spend a lot of their time. Her mother had credit there, so Lynn was allowed to purchase candy. This grocery store also butchered meat. During the summer day of the early 80s, someone or something vandalized the grocery store while the owners were on vacation. The front door had been torn through, and there was a large hole in the floor of the front porch. The majority of the butchered meat had been stolen. When the owners returned home, they started to blame the local residents of theft and vandalism. This was very much out of character for the people of this small town. Everyone depended on the grocery store. Besides, it was a friendly, tight-knit community, and crime is very rare. There were never any charges brought against anyone. The grocery store soon closed its business in Lovington and moved to another town. The grocery store building was left and abandoned. One early morning, a few months later, Lynn and her younger sister were home alone after her parents had rushed Lynn's older sister to the hospital several miles away. Lynn's sister had a ruptured appendix the night before and needed immediate treatment. Lynn was sleeping on the couch in the living room while her younger sister was fast asleep on the floor. Lynn was awoke by a loud creaking sound outside the front door. She raised up from the couch and thought she had seen a large, hairy head and shoulders in the window. Alarmed, Lynn immediately pulled the covers over her head while hoping this thing would just go away. She continued to hear noises on the porch. Once again, she noticed the same large, hairy head and shoulders standing in the window. It would duck down below the window, then slowly rise up. By this time, Lynn had become curious and thought that it was her cousins maybe playing a prank on her. Her little sister was still asleep on the floor. Lynn got off the couch and walked to the window and peeked outside. She was amazed to see a huge, hairy man swiftly striding toward the side of the house in the direction of the school. Lynn ran to the door, stepped out barefoot, and began to run after this large, hairy man. She was sure it was someone trying to scare her, and she was somewhat fearless when she was young. She was going to find out what it was. Lynn ran past the school and made her way to the abandoned grocery store. She heard noises coming from inside the building. She stepped onto the porch and immediately felt a sharp stabbing pain in her right foot. She quickly sat down on the porch and saw that she had stepped on a large splinter. She was in terrible pain as she tried to remove the splinter while tears flowed down her cheeks. Then, without warning, a large, hairy hand reached from behind and pointed at her injured foot. Lynn commented that the fingernails were black and that the hand was the size of a catcher's mitt with thick fingers. She said that she wasn't afraid of the hairy man, but didn't like the way it smelled. She looked up and saw a face of an ape-like man with long, dark reddish hair falling over it from the top of its head. The skin was like a tanned Caucasian man, but more rugged looking. The eyes were round and honey-colored. She reached up and pulled on the hair, wanting to see if it was a costume. She yanked it hard enough that the hairy man grimaced in a way that indicated that he didn't like it. But she also noticed compassion as well. The hairy man then picked Lynn up into his arms and cradled her like a baby. He rose to his feet and quickly walked in the direction of her house, occasionally stopping near a pine tree in order to see if anyone was watching. Lynn was afraid that the hairy man was going to kidnap her, but was relieved when they reached her house. He gently lowered her on the porch and watched as she tried to remove the splinter from her foot. The hairy man then turned quickly, as if he had heard something approaching. He ran off towards the large grove of pine trees and was gone. In a minute or two, the local police car was making its way down the street. Lynn said you could always tell it was the police because they had one patrol car and it made a loud squeaking noise as it went by. The hairy man must have heard it off in the distance and ran away. Lynn now believes that the hairy man was responsible for the break-in at the grocery store. She estimates that the hairy man was about 8 feet tall and covered with thick, long, reddish hair that seemed to slightly change in hue when it moved. Lynn said that she never saw the hairy man again, but she did see a smaller hairy biped a few years ago while she was driving home at night. Her account is not widely known, as she had never told anyone other than her daughter.
Alright folks, that was today's bonus upload. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Guys, thank you so much for all of your support. Your support is what makes this channel continue to grow and go and make it so special. With that, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on your family, your friends. God bless you all.